board. I have rather huge shoes to fill, given the tremendous leadership of my recent predecessors, Robert Boyles from South Carolina and Dr. Lewis Daniel from North Carolina. I thank Robert and Lewis for ably guiding this board over the past several years and pledge to do my very best to follow suit. Before we begin, I just want to note that we have a full agenda and just about 2 hours to get through it all. So I ask for the board's and the public's assistance in being as concise as possible with your comments and questions. By way of introduction, I wanted to introduce a new member up here at the head of the table, and that's Rob Kersey from Maryland. He's the new LEC rep to the Menhaden board. Welcome, Rob. So let's go right to the agenda. Item 1 is the agenda itself. I would like to add one item at the end under other business, that being board consideration of a resolution regarding exemplary service. Are there any other additions to the agenda? Seeing none, are there any objections to approving the agenda as revised? Seeing none, the agenda as revised stands approved by consent. We're on to item 2, which is the approval of the proceedings from the February 2016 board meeting. Are there any recommended changes to those meeting minutes? Seeing none, is there any objection to adopting those minutes? Seeing none, those minutes stand approved by consent. The next item is public comment. This is an opportunity for anyone from the public who wishes to comment on any issue that's not on today's agenda to do so. To accommodate that opportunity, we have a sign-up sheet, and I'll be going to it. But before doing so, I want to call upon Dr. Jane Henderson from North Carolina Sea Grant. And as I'm introducing Dr. Henderson, Henderson, please come to the public speaking portion of the platform. Thank you. Dr. Harrison is the, I did get it. Is it Harrison or Henderson? Harrison. You can go either way, but we're going to stay with Harrison for today. She is the co-PI on the socioeconomic study of the Menhaden fishery that's being conducted for the board, and she's here this morning to introduce herself. Good morning, Doctor.
Yes, thanks so much. I'm here today mostly just to introduce myself, Dr. Jane Harrison, and if you all would like to talk after the meeting, please do so. Myself and my research assistant, Brendan Adams from NC State University, NC Sea Grant, are here. And I'm sure, as many of you know, we are doing a study on the socioeconomics of the Menhaden fishery. I'm working with Dr. John Whitehead at Appalachian State University. He's done some previous work on this topic, and our interests are really to provide useful information for your decision making. So we're going to be doing some interviews after the board meeting with some of the stakeholder groups to better understand how the information might be used for this group. It's very much my interest that it is useful, that it's not just a long paper that I write that sits on a shelf somewhere. So in the RFP for this project, it was quite expansive in terms of what types of socioeconomic information the board is looking for, and we could certainly use a little more clarity on exactly what would be useful for you all. So we will be doing some work on both the reduction oil fishery and the bait fishery, doing some case studies, some interviews with the fishermen themselves, looking at some of the summary economic data for all of the states. But again, just introduce yourself, let us know if you'd like to talk more. We would love to do a short interview with anyone who's available, either in person today or we can talk on the phone later, just so that we better understand how our data can be useful for your all's work here. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, and we very much look forward to your work and your report back to the board. No one else has signed up to comment. Is there anyone else who wishes to comment at this point from the public? Seeing no hands, we'll move on to the next agenda item, which is item 4, and that is to consider the extension of and revision to the episodic event set-aside program. I'm going to turn to Mike Wayne for a brief presentation, drawing upon his memo to the board, which is in your meeting materials. As I do so, I just want to give the board a heads up that we have a total of 20 minutes set aside for this agenda item in its entirety, so the board is going to really need to be sharp and focused in its consideration. I also want to note that the item is an action item and involves two issues. One being whether the board wishes to extend the episodic event set-aside program, the other being consideration of New York's request to participate in that program, and I do plan to take up those issues separately in sequence. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mike. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So as Bob mentioned, I'm going to basically review the episodic event set-aside program and talk about a little bit about the performance over the last 3 years. And then in addition to that, we received a proposal from New York to consider revising to include them in the program, so we will talk about that as well. So just a quick reminder about how this program works. So through Amendment 2, back in 2012, the board set aside 1% of the TAC for episodic events. And following up on that, so the Amendment 2 gave flexibility for the board to actually specify how that 1% of the quota set aside would be administered. And so as a follow-up, the board tasked the subcommittee of New England states to further develop that program. They did so, and this board approved a pilot program back in May of 2013. And at the annual meeting of that year, the board extended that program through 2015 and included a provision to roll over unused set-aside on November 1. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about what that actual program was. So the current eligibility are the New England states from Maine through Connecticut. The states must implement the following mandatory provisions to be eligible for this set-aside. This includes good reporting. Harvest has to be restricted to state waters, and we put in a maximum daily trip limit no greater than 120,000 pounds per vessel. And then how the state actually declares if they met that criteria, which they submitted to us, and the plan review team signed off on it, and the board looked at that. If they met that criteria, they would monitor their landings to determine if an episodic event occurs. And the way we defined that was instances when a qualifying state has reached its individual state quota prior to September 1 and also has information indicating the presence of unusually large amounts of menhaden in its state waters. So that's how we're defining episodic events in this program. They have to let the commission know by September 1 that they plan to begin harvesting from that set-aside. And there's also this provision that they are not eligible for de minimis status if they opt into this program. So we also have in the program a mechanism to deal with both underages and overages that occurred through the performance. And so if an episodic event is not triggered by September 1, so no states declare that they're going to harvest from the set-aside, then the quota gets immediately rolled into the overall quota and gets redistributed back to the states. And if an episodic event is triggered by September 1 and all the states that participate do not harvest all of that set aside, then as of October 31st, we do a rollover of what's left to all the states using the same allocation in Amendment 2. On the flip side, if there's an overage, so a state opts into the set-aside, they end up landing more than the set-aside or state or states, there's a payback the following year, so it would ultimately be accounted for in the following year. So just a quick table to show you the performance of this set-aside. Remember, this is 1% of the TAC. We're talking 3.7 to 4.2 million pounds, depending on the year. And you can see that one state has utilized this set-aside program, and their harvest has ranged a little bit, last year being the highest as they've seen a lot of menhaden in Narragansett Bay in Rhode Island. is unique in that it has a biological monitoring program in Narragansett Bay that allows them to more scientifically assess when that biomass fluctuates to somewhat of an episodic level. So as I mentioned, the set-aside was previously extended through board action through 2015, and so the board may consider another extension of the program through board action at this meeting, and the board may also adjust any provisions of the set-aside through board action. So I just wanted to pause on that slide to just remind the board that setting aside the 1% was done through Amendment 2, and then subsequent to that, the board has made changes to this program on several occasions, as I outlined, through board action. And the plan actually allows for that flexibility to occur. So, Bob, I think I'll stop there, as the next topic is New York's request, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you for that, Mike. Are there any questions for Mike? Yes, David Borden.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Mike, could you refresh my memory as to the requirements? Do states have to submit proposals to the plan review team, or what actually is the process that's followed by a state in order to do this?
Sure, yeah. So
they obviously have to declare, but is there, what I'm trying to get at, is there a written document that every state have to submit that outlines all the steps they're going to take to be in compliance with it?
Yeah, we wrote this up in a document and called it Technical Addendum 1, and it outlines everything that I just went through in the slides of what the mandatory criteria is and what the steps are that the states go through to declare that they're going to harvest, et cetera. So yeah, that's all as summarized on the slide, and it's also written up in a document.
Other questions for Mike? Yes, Richie.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mike, to change the 1% amount, is that addendum, amendment, board action?
So it's to change the actual amount of the set-aside, that 1% would require an addendum or an amendment to the plan.
Other questions? Seeing none, at this time I would entertain a motion on this issue. Is David Borden?
Yeah, I'd like to make a motion, Mr. Chairman, move to extend the Episodic program until Amendment 3, which is the allocation amendment, is implemented. If I get a second, I would like to speak to it for just a second.
We have a second by Nicola, and I think we're going to work to get that up on the board. And why don't we, as we're getting that up on the board, why don't I go back to you, David?
Yeah, I think that next step in Menhaden management is really a critical step, where we're going to go back and look at all of state quota allocations, and it's my full expectation that the state allocations are going to change significantly as part of that mechanism. And when I say that, what I mean specifically is, I think that there are probably 9 states around the table that have very small allocations, and it's very difficult for those states to attempt to manage those fisheries because of the small amount, and particularly with a strong year class that seems to be manifesting itself. So I think the appropriate step at this point is to extend that, but all of those types of discussions may supersede this. We may not have a need to do this when we go through that process. Thank you.
Thank you. So we have the motion up on the board. David, is that consistent with your wording? Okay, so we have a motion up, made and seconded. Discussion on the motion. Yes, Terry Stockwell.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm partially comforted by this motion. I'm a little concerned with the language of that's until Amendment 3 has been implemented. I have there's no way to predict what this board is going to finally vote upon when Amendment 3 and the allocations come along. I would not be comfortable about perhaps even removing the episodic program at that point. So a little bit more discussion. I might make a motion to do a little wordsmithing.
Well, is there more discussion on the motion? Seeing none, this is your opportunity, Terry. I'm sorry, Kyle?
Yeah, I just, we're putting Band-Aids on a program that was founded in principles that weren't in science, that were a mistake. We did a knee-jerk reaction, and here we are talking about, episodic events, and New York has an issue, and 9 states around the room don't have enough, quota to manage, and, whether we're dip nets here or pound nets there when, in the Chesapeake Bay. Yesterday, we were talking about raising the quota for a species that was almost on the endangered species list. Here we have a species that has never been overfished. Overfishing has never occurred, and we're doling them out like we only got 5 of them left, 5 fish. We've got more fish than that. We've got all the fish that we need on these. Let's just raise the TAC. Give these 9 states what they need. Get rid of all these stupid rules about, 2 people want to fish together, well, they need more fish, or, this state throws out a net, We're talking about pittance of fish, and we're spending all this time on nothing. Raise the TAC. Give these states the fish they need, and let's move on to more pressing issues, some real issues on fish that are really in trouble. Not this oily fish that we have plenty of. We just got another report, another banner year coming up. Let's do the right thing. Let's get to an issue that matters more than trying to conserve a fish that's not overfished and overfishing's not occurred. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me go back to Terry.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just a brief sidebar. I think my issue can be resolved by asking Mike a question that would confirm that, there's every reason the board can consider episodic event in Amendment 3. Is that correct, Mike?
Yeah, absolutely. The way I interpret this motion is this takes you through Amendment 3, and in Amendment 3, the board can consider any aspect of Menhaden management, including this episodic event set-aside program, and therefore whatever gets decided in Amendment 3 could either carry this forward or however the board ends up choosing to move forward with this. So I think this just gets you through until the board decides to make any changes in Amendment 3.
Okay, thanks for the clarification, and thank you, David, for the motion.
Kyle, one more shot.
Yeah, I'm sorry, but we don't have to wait for Amendment 3. We can raise the TAC without Amendment 3. We can, we don't have to go through all this motion to solve the problem. Am I correct?
Well, we certainly can't do what you're asking to do today. It's not on the agenda, and it's not before the board today. We could talk about what we could potentially do down the road, but right now we're looking at the issue that's before us today. Mike wants to add something.
Yeah, we're a little bit ahead. So one of the agenda items is to provide guidance to the technical committee on stock projections, and that's the intent of that is so that the board can come back in August and set the 2017 TAC. And at that point, the board would consider whether to keep the TAC the same or make a change to it. So that is coming, Kyle, but it's not part of the agenda today, but the board will give guidance. So when we get to that agenda item, I would suggest that you consider what kind of stock projections and what constant harvest tax you'd like to see come August.
Thank you.
Thank you for that discussion. David.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman. I'll be very brief. I think this is just a sequencing issue. I think almost everybody around the table wants to get on with a broader discussion of allocations and TACs, but we're confronted with a situation where this program needs to be extended and in the near term, and between now and this summer, when I fully expect the situation with Menhaden to significantly change if this year class manifests itself in some of the state waters. I think we've got to have a program that addresses the issue in the short term, and that's the reason I made the motion. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see any other hands. I think we've had good discussion. Let's have a 15-second caucus, and then I'll call the vote. Okay, on the motion to extend the episodic event program until Amendment 3 has been implemented, all in favor, please raise your hand. Thank you. Opposed, same side, sign. Null votes, abstentions. It passes unanimously. Thank you. I'll now go back to Mike for a brief presentation on New York's request.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So New York submitted a proposal that was in your briefing materials. The request is to be included as part of the episodic events set-aside program, the one that the board just extended. So New York is experiencing episodic fish kills in Peconic Bay on the very east end of Long Island. This happened last year, and it's basically happening right now this year. The fish kills result in enormous cleanup and socioeconomic impacts. A lot of dead menhaden on the beach. I'm sure Jim would love to talk more about that. And New York is requesting to land under the set-aside, and remember that this program originally was restricted to the New England states, and eastern Long Island sticks out pretty far and is relatively close to those that New England region. In terms of PRT review. So David, this gets back to your question about the process that all the states went through to be eligible, and how we determined that eligibility. So we had New York, preemptively we had New York submit how they intend to administer this harvesting under this set-aside if the board agrees to it. And so the PRT got together pretty quickly over the last few days to review that, and our recommendations after looking at their proposal were that the daily reporting is a critical, especially given New York's quota overages that have occurred in the last couple years, and then that the commission may want to consider requesting more frequent than weekly reporting to us, considering that there's a possibility then that there might be multiple states harvesting from this set-aside, and just to make sure that we're adequately monitoring that set-aside as it progresses so that we can avoid an overage if that is a situation that we would be in. So that's a quick and brief review of their proposal. And Jim is probably best to answer any questions that the board should have. Thank you.
Yeah, let me go to Jim, and then we'll take questions for either Mike or Jim. Jim?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks, Mike. I'll just be brief and add a couple of updates that we've gotten. And first off, to really emphasize this is all about preventing a fish kill and, a public health issue, public nuisance issue. And just to add on, when I was talking to Mike, not many people realize the political boundary of New England is very different than the biological boundary, and if anybody knows where Fisher's Island is, it's a hell of a lot closer to Connecticut than it is to New York, so in terms of, Long Island. So just the one big update is last evening, and we got the water quality data back. In the briefing package, there was a report from last year to document the event that's happening again this year. We have a lot more Menhaden, but the algae bloom that exacerbated this thing started this week, and for all of you microbiologists, the Proceedings cells are up to 146,000 cells per milliliter. And Alexandrium, which is an appropriate species for where we are right now, there's a tributary called Meetinghouse Creek. They're 350 milliliters, cells per liter right now. Alexandrium is red tide, so we didn't have that last year, so this could even be worse. So again, this is really not about taking advantage of the fishery or anything. In fact, we may have to subsidize the fishermen. They're going to be doing this way with beach seines because we don't have a reduction fishery. We don't have a commercial fleet any longer. So the best we're probably going to do is maybe reduce the size of the kill as opposed to actually eliminate it, but we're really going to try to do that. So anyway, with those notes, I'll answer any questions, and when you're ready, Mr. Chairman, I have a motion.
Jim, why don't we do this? Why don't we get your motion up on the board? It's inevitable that it's going to be happening, so why don't we do that and then take questions and comments on the motion and wrap those together. So at this point, I'd entertain a motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Move to add New York as an eligible state to the Episodic Event Set-Aside Program.
Is there a second to that? Seconded by Dave Simpson. Moved by Jim Gilmore, seconded by Dave Simpson. We'll get the motion up on the board. As that motion is going up, comments and or questions on the motion, beginning with Cherie.
This really doesn't pertain to the motion that's up on the board, but I do have a question for Jim. In regards to part of this problem appears to be water quality concerns about what's coming out of Peconic River. Is there any movement forward to improve these water quality conditions to help negate this sort of kill?
Yeah, the town of Riverhead is actually looking for both state and federal funding to upgrade their sewage plants, and there's also Suffolk County is working on a nitrogen reduction. I think the report, and what was difficult last year, was that everybody was blaming it on nitrogen, and these kills occurred, over history. So we essentially said that the nitrogen maybe exacerbated the kill. If you had pure water out there, the physics of all the Menhaden, and when the bluefish show up, you're going to have these kills anyway, maybe not as large, but so there is a separate effort going on to do nitrogen reduction to hopefully eliminate or reduce the blooms that occur with these things.
So far, I've got indications that Terry Stockwell and Dave Simpson want to comment. I also have Bill Adler's hand up. Others who wish to comment on this, Dave, Eric, others who wish to comment, keep your hands up. I'm going to have Mike write down the names, and then we'll go down the list, and I'll try to go back and forth between pro and con. Keep your hands up, if you could, for just one more minute. And at this point, I'll go to Dave Simpson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I just want to sort of reinforce Jim's comments about the kills that occurred last year, especially really tremendous abundance of Menhaden last year. Numbers beginning early in the year that I haven't seen in my lifetime, and we were experiencing kills at the same time, pretty much from one end of the state to the other, where water quality wasn't an issue. Both states were doing work to try to identify the source of the kill, the responsible critter, so to speak, and the Cornell University, identified a virus as the cause, and I think that's what was happening on our end. Because there were so many fish around, I think New York's problems were more complicated. So certainly the number one cause is just the tremendous abundance of Menhaden that we've seen, and we're not seeing as many this year, but the young of year, maybe the year class that Dave Borden is referring to, is tremendously abundant this year in our waters. The bigger fish just came in. So I expect this is going to be a more regular occurrence. Some of these smaller fish were dying at March, April timeframe. The one other thing I'll add, and Jim answered the question for me, but as we consider more fishing in areas that didn't previously support a Menhaden fishery, is, we'll want to pay attention to the types of gears that are used and the potential for bycatch. I think that will be my worry. Not such a big concern with seines, but if we start talking about miles of gillnet, I'm going to be nervous for other species and interactions. But I fully support the motion.
Thank you. I do have a list, but I want to go to those who already raised their hand, those wishing to speak in opposition. Could you raise your hand again? Terry.
Well, I'm maybe partial opposition, because I have a great deal of sympathy for Jim and the residents of Eastern New York, because the very same thing happened in the cove next to my house about 15 years ago. We had 2+ feet of bogeys right up on the beach. It took us months and months to vacuum them out and clean up the mess it left behind. But I've got in principle, I'm not opposed to adding New York, but the question I have is how much of this 1% of episodic fish do we have, do you anticipate you would need to harvest? If this year class does come around the corner, Maine fishermen have been waiting for a long time to have access to them. And I would be hesitant to support something that diverted some of that fish away if particularly Maine had no access to them when the fish do come at the latter part of the summer.
It's actually a good question, Terry, because well, first off, I don't think we're going to add anywhere near the 4 million pounds. Just from if you do the math on this, a handful of fishermen with beach seines with I think we put in a 30,000 pound trip limit are not going to be able to, really take more than, last year the kill was in the 500,000 to, million pound range. So I think if we were able to get all of those fish, maybe we'd get 1 million pounds, but I don't think we're going to get more than a few 100,000.
Would you be willing to put a cap on the amount of the episodic event that's available?
Well, that's a bigger discussion, because we thought about doing that, but then it's going to be, well, that puts a cap then on every other state, and we don't have a ceiling on it, which was, I think, the difficulty when I first looked at it. It says, well, it left a 1% for the entire episodic event, but it never really identified what, each state limit would be. So, it would be completely arbitrary. Maybe we can report out, and I think if we do get to maybe 1 million pounds, at that point, I think this thing is going to take so long that the kill would have happened, and we're going to stop at that point anyway.
I mean, I'd like to help you out, but I'm having a hard time without throwing my own guys under the bus here. I mean, if there was some way you'd cap it at 1 million pounds or something, so that some portion of it would be available to those who are waiting further down the line for the fish to come, I could support it. But as it stands, I can't support the motion on the board.
Let me continue with the names. I'll go to Rob O'Reilly next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And so listening a little bit, this is symptomatic of a situation where you have a very strong population, abundance-wise and in every other aspect, and New York has to be added on as the episodic, and later on it's going to have to be something a little bit different, because I read the report and the Suffolk Health Department really did a in-depth report. And so if you looked at the report, these problems were prevalent in 2008 and 2009. And if you look at some of the other parts of the tables, it's amazing that 2010 wasn't a big problem as well. Maybe it wasn't a good match between the movements of the Menhaden and the low DO conditions, which were sort of tagged as the main problem. So I certainly support the motion. I just think as we go forward, there has to be something in place to assist with these events. It brought back some very bad memories, and I'm sure it did the same for Maryland back to 1997 and 1998, when we had Menhaden fish kills, and we watched within a matter of a couple of months our seafood businesses react, very quickly to the negative. And I think one of the positives is for everyone to know that it's a temporary situation, no matter where it occurs, and it can be addressed. So with those words, I do support the motion.
Thank you. I'll go to Bill Adler next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, in the document that New York put out, it says it's requesting a one-time harvest in 2016. And apparently, according to this particular motion, it would be added to the rest of the states that already have the episodic event area program. And so I'm a little confused. I'm not against the motion, but requesting one time, and that's apparently not what's up on the board. My second concern is similar to Terry's, because I can't remember the number. What do we have available as the 1% for all of us that are in it? Is that 4 million, 3 million? What's the number?
Mike, do you have that?
Yeah, it's about 4.2 million pounds is that 1% of the TAC in this year. And so it obviously changes if the TAC changes, so that's why it's at 4.2 now. Okay,
but right now it's like 4.2. We're going into this year. I'm in favor, actually, of the motion, but I am concerned, as Terry is, that I don't want, I wouldn't want New York to take so much that when it happens up in Massachusetts or New Hampshire or Maine, there's nothing left for further north. So I'm a little concerned. I'm not against it. I understand what New York wants to do. I did want an answer about New York is requesting a one-time harvest and how that differs from putting it into the program apparently forever or as long as it's there. What's New York's position on that?
Well, do you want to? Why don't we get through the comments first, and then we'll circle back to the issues that have been raised. Next, I'll go to Lynn Fagley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not opposed to the motion. But I do have a question for Jim. So, is there a reason why you can't shut the fishery down and harvest this under bycatch? Is that because it's too much for trip limit? Is that why?
Yeah, it's at 6,000 pounds a day. There's just no way they could do a dent in the size of the population. I mean, these are all wild estimates, but it's like what David said. It's like when we were back to a reduction fishery, 100 years ago. That's the size of this thing that no one has seen in many, many years.
Eric Reed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Rhode Island has used episodic event for the last couple of years, and it's been a great help to the state of Rhode Island. I'm very sympathetic to the pending disaster that's going to happen in New York. I'm pretty sure we all know that's coming. But at 120,000 pounds a day, which is what the episodic event allows, that's 3 days fishing for 12 boats. To have that entire episodic event wiped out, potentially in 3 days. I understand the 30,000 pound trip limit, but funny things happen when there's fish up to here. So my question is there any other way to solve New York's problem other than potentially giving them 100% of the episodic event? I mean, for example, could Virginia transfer 500 tons to New York and have, somebody that really knows how to catch a lot of menhaden at one time go up there and do it? I mean, New York is talking about subsidizing the fishermen and not being able to do anything with the fish. I mean, to me, let Virginia give New York 500 tons and send one of the big boys up in there and clean them up. You can clean them up in a couple of days and be done with it. Thank you.
So I'll just say transfers are allowed under the program. Jim, let me just, if I could, I'm just going to run through the comments, and I know you're taking notes as I am on some of the issues that are being raised, and then I'll come back to you and maybe you could address them in full. Next I have Richie White.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I support Terry's concern, and I think it would be totally appropriate for us to put a cap on the amount because we're bringing New York in as a new state into this. So the existing states, don't have a cap, but I think it would be fine for us to set a cap for New York, where we're making an exception and bringing New York in. And then secondly, I guess I would have a question for Mike to refresh my memory of why why New York wasn't part of the program originally. And I just can't remember the discussion on that.
Mike?
It came down to that the episodic events of Menhaden showing up in larger abundances was more historical to the New England region. And Jim is obviously documenting that these Menhaden in the eastern Long Island, Peconic Bay is episodic. They don't see it every year, but they've seen it the last 2 years.
David Borden?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've got a question for Jim, and then a couple of points I want to make, and I'll do it quickly. Jim, in terms of the size of the fish that you're encountering, what is the size of the fish? And this related question is this a problem in the spring and potentially in the fall again, or is it just a spring-related event?
Jim, you want to jump on that one question?
Yeah, let me tell you, obviously we've got a potential in the fall because traditionally our fish kills, we haven't seen them in the spring. This is kind of the new thing. So yes, there is a potential in the fall. Steve has got a little bit mad. The size of the fish, I think they were anywhere from, it's a mix from peanut butter all the way up to large adult fish. So we've got the whole gamut.
Okay, so thank you for that. I share Terry Stockwell's concerns, and I just offer the suggestion that I think we've got to think in a broader context here than just this. If we look at the actual performance, and Mike put the data up of performance, in 2014 we harvested all under this program, under the existing regulations, without New York as part of it. We harvested all but 8%. And then what was it, 45%, Mike? You've got that slide on it.
Yeah. So last year you only harvested 8% of the set aside, and then this past year in 2015 you harvested 45%.
Okay, so
yeah.
I've got my numbers garbled, but I mean the point is still the same. If you're harvesting 45% of the allocation, and we have this problem in New York, let's say it manifests itself in Connecticut and Maine, it's going to be a fairly short period of time before you're going to use the allocation up. And so what I would suggest is that I support adding New York to the program. I'm not sure a cap is a good idea, although I fully support the concerns that have been voiced by Terry and others about using up all the allocation. And then what I would suggest is that we either add this to the summer agenda item, the cap itself, so that we could regulate it, or think about some mechanism where if the population manifests itself in a whole group of different states and we bump up against the cap, then we have some ability to do a fax poll increase, or consider a fax poll increase in the cap to simply raise the cap. I'm not willing to simply trade a problem in one state for creating a problem in another state. I think we've got to think in a broader context. Thank you.
Thanks. I'm going to go to Roy Miller, and then I have Adam Nowalski, and then I'm going to go back to Jim for a response to several of the comments. Thank you. So next I have Roy Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me just state right up front that I feel Jim Gilmore's pain. One of my jobs was to head up fish kill coordination for the state of Delaware. I did that for 25 to 30 years. And my point in raising this issue is that these are not all that unusual. It wasn't a matter of whether Menhaden were going to die in our state. It was a matter of when they were going to die in our state. So it was an event that occurred with no degree of regularity, but the only regularity was that, yes, there were going to be fish kill events. Now, most of our Menhaden kills took place in restricted tributaries, boat lagoons, that kind of thing, where commercial level harvesting would be impractical or illegal. But I think Rob O'Reilly touched on this. It's not unusual. Most of the states in the mid-Atlantic areas have experienced these fish kill events, if not frequently, then fairly regularly. So we're setting a precedent by adding one state. Which states do you exclude from the ability to participate in an episodic event in order to head off Menhaden fish kills, which are distressingly common? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Adam?
Thank you very much. So I certainly appreciate New York bringing this to the table, and I think as we've heard around the table, the episodic events was meant for something that doesn't occur normally, and as Roy just alluded to, fish kills do happen more often, quite frankly, than we'd like to admit. I am struck by some of the words that I've heard here most recently. This board and the commission as a whole took an action with significant economic impacts just a couple years ago, and I'm struck by what the public might take away. We're now using the terms a nuisance fish and that we have to subsidize harvest, because if these fishermen go out and take the fish, they can't make money off of them anyway at this time. The message that sends is very troubling to me, and it definitely tells me that we've got to find some better solution to this issue. With regards to the motion here, I'm having trouble supporting it as is. I think I'd have to see some type of number put on it. I'm not prepared to say what that number is, both in deference to the northern states, knowing what the impact might be, as well as the number that New York needs to address this situation. And I certainly think we should not do this until Amendment 3. This should be for 1 year, and encourage this board to find some other way to take action on this issue moving forward.
Thank you. Jim, let me go back to you now. I know there's been a lot of comments raised, and you're free to respond to some or all of them at this point. Thank you.
All right, let me go from the bottom up. That might be a little easier. First off, and just to echo Adam's comments, I said the real thing we're trying to do is to get maybe some of these fish to market for a use because they have value. If this, if we let this go down and we have this fish kill, they're going to go into a landfill. And I think the commission is going to look pretty silly saying, oh, wow, you had an opportunity actually to have a beneficial use of these fish, but we let them go to a landfill because of, whatever. So that's, I think we can't wait on this. I mean, I think we're all going to have a black eye if we don't do something at least to try to fix this. The precedent by adding New York, again, if you look at the map in the back of the briefing book, Roy, tell me where biological New England ends and political, versus political New England, and the Peconics, Fishers Island, the east end of Long Island Sound is all of Long Island Sound is part of New England. So it's, it gets to be a little bit, but that's splitting hairs. Again, I still think that, being part of that New England part of it makes a little bit of sense from a biological standpoint. I did the size of the fish. I'll come back to the cap because I don't have any problem trying to put an upper cap on this. But again, to Terry's comment, if we limit it to say 1 million pounds, well, Rhode Island could take the other 3.2, Terry, and you're still screwed. So I mean, that doesn't really fix that problem. But again, we can talk about that. Why we weren't in the program previously is we don't have a reduction fishery. We haven't seen Menhaden. So a few years ago, we were talking about this. There were very few Menhaden around except for our bait fishery, so we really didn't see the need. We hadn't had fish kills like this for many, many years, so it really didn't seem like we were going to have to deal with this, and hopefully when we get to the next amendment, we'd really think about it at that point. We did think about having a commercial fishery, Eric, and actually I was going to maybe become friends with Omega to have come up and be a big trawler. First off, remember the reduction fishery is most an ocean fishery with purse seines. This is a very shallow inner bay area, hard to get to. So you wouldn't be able to get commercial quantities of what would make it economically viable for anybody to do that. So we thought about that, it just wasn't going to work. And the one-time only bill, just as this was unfolding, we were trying to do this very quickly and get something in the briefing book. When we were trying to tweak this as a modified episodic event with different limits, and it got very complicated. And after I talked to Bob, whatever, it says it's very simple. Just if we just include us in the episodic event, then all the limits are there, and we have to meet the requirements of that, not customize an episodic event for New York. So that one-time only thing was an earlier version. Probably should have taken it out, but it's just cleaner if we just put New York in the episodic event under the current rules that were debated under the addendum, not, as a new episodic event program for New York. I think that got all of them.
I think you did cover them all as well. I see 2 hands up. I'm going to go to Tom and then Terry, and then I'm going to look to the board to either move the question or amend the question. Tom Foti?
Yeah, I walked in late. I had to do something, but I'm sitting here listening to this, and this is not an unusual occurrence. I mean, in the last 4 years, we've had fish kills in New Jersey up and down the coast because of warm water and low oxygen, and it happens. Or the bluefish chase them into areas, and they get caught in these low oxygenated areas, and they basically die. So it's not an episodic event. It's a normal occurrence. It has been occurring. When I lived in Brooklyn, I used to see it all the time. When I lived in New Jersey, I see it all the time. And, yeah, it's a shame to waste those fish, but it's basically you have quotas, you have set up a plan to do this, and it's not an episodic event. So I'm having a problem handling it this way. Since we probably have had about 10 fish kills in the last 4 years in New Jersey, it's not because of overabundance. Is because a lot of times they get chased into areas that have low oxygen by schools of other fish penning them. And that's part of nature. I'm sorry.
Thank you. Terry?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Jim, for your comments and thoughts. I mean, it's no doubt we have a big problem. And listening to all the comments around the table, everyone wants to help New York out, including me. But I can't help out New York without a cap, so I'm going to make a motion to amend, and the motion to amend is going to be what the northern states are going to do to help New York, and perhaps you'll be able to get some help from some of the southern states too. So my motion to amend is to cap New York to 1 million pounds of the episodic set aside for 2016.
Is there a second to that? Seconded by Richie White, moved by Terry Stockwell, seconded by Richie White. We'll get the motion up on the board. There's been, I think, enough discussion on this issue that what I'd like to do is once the motion is up and we're comfortable, the maker is comfortable with it, I'm going to call for a vote on the motion to amend, and then we're going to try to quickly move to the final vote based on how that first vote comes out. So let's make sure we've got the motion correct. And Terry, do I understand that this motion does 2 things? It would cap New York at 1 million pounds. It would also limit New York's participation to the 1 year, 2016. Do I read that correctly?
No, my intention would be to add New York as an eligible state, but this cap would be specific to this year only, with anticipation that there'd be further board action to address a broader issue.
Thank you for that clarification. Is everyone comfortable with the motion, at least understanding what its intent is? If so, I'm going to call for a 1-minute caucus and then a vote on the motion to amend. Okay, I'm going to call the question. All in favor of the motion to amend, please raise your hand. Opposed, like sign. Null votes. Abstentions. 2 abstentions. So the motion to amend passes 15 in favor, 0 in opposition, 2 abstentions. So the amended motion becomes the main motion. Are there any further burning comments or questions regarding the main, what is now the main motion? I see 3 hands. I'll go to Bill Adler, Nicola, and then Dave Borden. Or Nicola, I guess, in lieu of Bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a question about the intent of this motion, whether it captures the other elements of New York's proposal, that it is limited to the Peconic River harvest and a 30,000-pound trip limit. Thank you.
Jim, what's your take on that?
Again, we had the same thing. There were fish kills. I mean, we could limit it geographically, but then I'm starting to draw lines in a map, and then we're probably going to be here for another hour if we start doing that. I mean, this is intended just for the Peconics. We have no reason to expand that, but I don't know where to draw the line, because you got the North Shore of Long Island and so on and so forth. We had a lot of small kills last year, which we were not going to harvest under. It was really these things where we have solely in the Peconics right now.
Dave Borden, did you have your hand up?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a quick point. I can support the motion, but I still have reservations about the whole TAC and the potential impacts for all the other states up and down the coast. So I'm going to make I'll vote for the motion, but excuse me. Afterwards, I'm going to suggest that we add this item to the agenda for the summer meeting, and that the staff report on the status, and we include on the agenda consideration of increasing the allocation for this program.
Okay, I'll come back to you after the vote, and we'll make sure we've got those points in the meeting minutes. At this point, I'd like to call the question. This is now the main motion. It is a final action because of the, well, let me ask this. Is there any opposition to the motion? Seeing none, otherwise there would be a roll call vote.
Point of order?
Yes.
Please, I think because of final action, is it not required that we have a roll call vote?
It is required unless there is no opposition, and that's why I just asked the question. Again, I'll ask, is there any opposition to this motion? There is. So we will now have a roll call vote. Thank you. And I'll call for Mike Wayne to call the roll.
Thank you. Maine?
Yes.
New Hampshire?
Yes.
Commonwealth of Massachusetts?
Yes.
Rhode Island?
Yes.
Connecticut?
Yes.
New York?
Yes.
New Jersey?
Yes.
Pennsylvania?
No.
Delaware?
Yes.
Maryland?
Yes.
The Potomac River Fisheries Commission?
Yes.
The Commonwealth of Virginia?
Yes.
North Carolina?
Yes.
South Carolina?
Yes.
Georgia?
Yes.
Florida?
Yes.
NOAA Fisheries?
Abstain.
U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service?
Abstain.
So we have the motion passes 15 in favor, 1 opposed, and 2 abstentions. Thank you for that. And Dave Borden, do you want to just once again, so the record is clear, repeat your request for what you'd like to be on the agenda for the summer meeting?
So my request is that this item be added to the agenda for the summer meeting, that we get a report on the status of the program, including landings to date, and that we specifically add to the agenda consideration of a possible increase in the allocation for the program if needed. Thank you.
Thank you. And with that, we're on to the next agenda item, which is the consideration of draft addendum 1 for public comment. This is an action item, that being board approval of draft addendum 1 for public comment. We have 45 minutes, which now has been truncated considerably for this item, but I think we might be able to get through it. Well, we'll see how we do, but be advised that we probably now have about a half hour or less on this item. So we'll begin with a presentation on the issue by Mike Wayne. Mike?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. and I will do my best to move through this as quickly as possible. Let's talk about the timeline first. So in February, the board initiated this addendum to consider a revision to the Amendment 2 bycatch allowance. We are currently at the May board meeting where the board is reviewing a draft for public comment. If approved, it would go out for public comment period from May through July, and at the August board meeting, the board would review public comment on this document and select final options, and implementation is obviously contingent on that schedule. In terms of the Menhaden bycatch provision, let's talk a little bit about how that works. So a state gets an allocation. They open their fishery. All landings prior to a state reaching its quota count towards that quota. So regardless of whether it's directed or bycatch targeted, whatever, all those landings occur until the quota is reached, count towards the quota. Once the state reaches its quota, it closes its Menhaden fishery and then can land 6,000 pounds per vessel per day under a bycatch allowance provision that was included in Amendment 2. However, that bycatch provision doesn't allow two individuals to fish from the same vessel because it's a vessel limit and land up to 12,000 pounds of bycatch together. Instead, they have to fish separately and land 6,000 pounds from separate vessels. And so this creates an efficiency because in the Chesapeake Bay, for example, it is common during that open season for pound netters to pool resources and fish together. These are family members that work each other's pounds. And then the PDT examined that all stationary multi-species gear may benefit from the pooling their resources. So even though this is common to the Chesapeake Bay pound netting, the PDT also explored other multi-species stationary gears that may want to take advantage of this as well. So let's talk a little bit about the performance of the fishery. So from 2013 through 2015, remember Amendment 2 went in starting in 13, so we have 3 years of that quota management program. The bycatch allowance landings have averaged about 5.5 million pounds, ranging from 4 to almost 7. This represents a small percentage of coastwide landings, about 1 to 2%. By location, the Chesapeake Bay jurisdictions, so that's Maryland, Virginia, and the Potomac River Fisheries Commission, account for 81% of that average bycatch from those years. And then New York, New Jersey, Florida, Delaware, and Rhode Island account for the remainder. By gear, this is predominantly pound nets at 61%, and there are also anchored and stake gill nets that make up a larger portion at 24%. So I admit this table is a little bit difficult to read. However, it is very clearly in the addendum. It's table 1. I'll just try to orient you to it, and you can look at it in the draft addendum that was in your materials. So the plan development team, the columns represent states, and the rows represent gear types, making distinction between stationary gears while fishing, which is the top portion, and mobile gears while fishing, which is the bottom. So within all the cells is the average landings that occurred under the bycatch allowance within all those jurisdictions. The highlighted gray cells are supposed to give you a quick glance at what gear type is representing the most landings under that bycatch. And so that first row is pound nets. You see that very large percentage at 61%. And then the gill nets, actually coming mainly from Virginia, are what make up that other large component of the stationary gear types. I'll just point out that there are mobile gears while fishing using this set aside. Those percentages shown all the way to the right are much lower than those stationary gears. So moving on to trips as opposed to landings. So from 2013 through 15, a total of 12,750 trips were landed under the bycatch allowance. That's a slight correction from what was in your document. I caught an error since the document was released in your materials, but it's pretty insignificant. So about almost 9,000 of those trips were from those stationary gears that we just talked about. And again, the Chesapeake Bay is accounting for 88% of all stationary gear trips. So of those trips in the Chesapeake Bay, approximately 40% are from Maryland and PRFC from their pound net fishery, and approximately 59% are from the anchored stake gill nets in Virginia. So when we looked at the trips by landing bin, so we separated the 6,000 pounds into 1,000-pound landing bins and looked at the distribution of the trips across those landing bins and across all the states, what we saw was 60% are landing under 1,000 pounds. So these are smaller scale that are landing are less than 1,000 pounds, and then the one gear type that rose to the surface where notable landings were exceeding 3,000 pounds were from pound nets. So ultimately, this is, again, admittedly a little hard to read, but this is Table 2, very clearly documented in your addendum. And it splits up, once again, the rows are the states. These are total trips across the bottom. And then the percentages show the breakdown of those total trips within that state in the different 1,000-pound landing bins. And so you can see the largest category there being trips landing under 1,000 pounds. And if you go to the next slide, I just wanted to highlight that these are those trips that are landing those larger poundages, being from Maryland and the Potomac River Fisheries Commission, and being attributed to mainly pound nets. So in summary, bycatch landings are largely from pound net fisheries in Maryland and PRFC, as well as anchored gill net fishery in Virginia. Pound net trips are landing menhaden amounts that would lend to cooperative fishing behavior, meaning they're landing those larger landing bins. And however, we did explore this for more than just pound nets in the bay. And so there are other stationary multi-species gear types that land menhaden as bycatch. So a little bit about stationary gears and landing composition. So there was a request in this addendum to look at what the percent composition of menhaden was on these trips that were harvesting under this bycatch allowance. And we did that, but we're a little bit concerned with the figure, and I'll tell you why. So on average, 71% of the catch and weight for all gear types combined were menhaden on these trips. But the PDT expected that because the trips that we evaluated were only the trips that actually landed menhaden. So in essence, this figure is biased because we only considered the trips that landed menhaden. We actually tried to consider including all trips, not just the ones that landed menhaden, but that task was too difficult to complete due to all the different fisheries that are harvesting menhaden under this allowance, and basically accounting for all those trips that those individuals would have taken. So there's another section in the addendum that just basically sort of tries to identify these gears a little further, stating that pound nets are fixed, staked, or anchored nets that passively catch menhaden in large schools, so they're not actively targeting any species specifically. Staked gill nets are similar, in which they usually are fished in the same location, whereas anchored gill nets are stationary while set but can move daily. Gill net catches depend on area being fished, and pots are not a multi-species gear and are usually targeting species or specific species. So we try to characterize some of those stationary gear types while fishing that we had identified in Table 1. We also threw in a section about the stock status, and so as a reminder, the stock is not overfished and overfishing is not occurring. That's based on the 2015 benchmark assessment. And the TC previously reviewed conservation equivalency from Maryland and PRFC, where they originally proposed a modification to allow this fishing together. And the TC reviewed those proposals and agreed that they would not adversely impact the biological status of Menhaden because, one, the current healthy stock status, two, there's that limited 1% to 2% that these bycatch landings represent coast-wide, and that Maryland and PRC pound net fisheries are limited entry, meaning they have actively put in some cap on the effort, and so there isn't a great opportunity for these bycatch fisheries to expand in these two locations for the gear types identified. So now I'm going to move into the management options that the plan development team included in this document after looking at all the data and considering the initiative by the board. So this revises section 4.2.1.7 of Amendment 2. That is that bycatch allowance provision section that allows for this program to occur. The status quo is that the bycatch allowance would stay at 6,000 pounds per day per vessel, so not allowing fishing together. Option B is working together permitted for all stationary multi-species gears. So we've just corrected or included language that would address that. And then we define stationary multi-species gears as pound nets, anchored/stake gill nets, and fyke nets. And the PDT excluded pots because it is not a multi-species gear. It is usually specifically targeting species. Option C is working together permitted for all stationary multi-species gears operating in a limited entry fishery. And so remember, this gets back to the TC's approval, which they liked that the programs from Maryland and PRFC were for pound net fisheries that had limited entry in place. So that was an effort cap. And so we included in here an option that would basically only allow this fishing together to happen on for stationary multi-species gears that were operating in a limited entry fishery. And here is a table. I don't expect you to be able to see this, but once again, it is in your addendum. It is Appendix 1. And I would just like for all the commissioners, if we end up finalizing this, to confirm that that last column, which identifies the gear types that are limited entry, is correct before this goes out for comment if it does. So I just wanted to mention that table, as I'll be looking for the board to make any corrections, and we might be missing a little information. So please check out Appendix 1 to make sure that information is correct for your state. And then option D is the last option, and that is that working together would be permitted for pound nets only. So this gets back to sort of the original request, in that two individuals fishing together reaching that bycatch limit is most commonly documented for pound nets, and that's supported by the data. So those are the four options that were included in the document to address this. And then in terms of compliance, state may implement any applicable changes whenever that occurs upon final addendum approval. So whatever the board decides on this, the states could implement that relatively quickly, or the board could determine when an implementation date would be appropriate. And the PDT just felt it appropriate to note, which I think is something that everyone's probably thinking about, that we have initiated Amendment 3. We will definitely be revisiting state-by-state allocations and just allocation in general. And so keeping that in mind, wanted to inform everybody that that is slated for sort of the next step here. So anything selected finally in this addendum may ultimately be changed through the Amendment 3 process, depending on whatever happens with that management document. So I'd be happy to entertain any questions at this time. Thanks.
Thank you, Mike, for that presentation. So we'll take questions from Mike, and then we'll take suggestions for any changes to the draft document. Lynn?
Yes, thank you. My question is just option D, and I think it's clear in the draft addendum. So pound nets in this case does that include the floating fish traps? Pound nets is what's included in pound net?
Mike?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, good question, Lynn. So to make it easier, we did call pound nets and consider, the footnote is on page 4. It says it says pound nets include floating fish traps and fishing weirs, and this classification applies throughout the document, including the management options. So you're right, there are regional differences in what are referred to as pound nets, and basically, however, the PDT interpreted that as those, even though it's called something different, they are still considered pound nets, and that's all the data shows under that same designation as pound nets.
Steve?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mike, I want to make sure I understand this right, because we just spent about 25 minutes arguing about where 1% of the fishery was going, and we have almost 2% of the fishery that is caught and not counted at all in the quota?
Correct. Correct. So at the time that Amendment 2 was finalized, not a lot was known about the magnitude of these bycatch fisheries. And so you're right that the landings under this bycatch allowance do not count towards the TAC, which was a decision that the board made through finalizing Amendment 2, and it also represents approximately 1 to 2% of the landings coast-wide.
Additional questions for Mike. Emerson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mike, for your report. Mike, I know there's a table in the document that you had on one of your slides that shows the percentage of trips by 1,000-pound bin classes for stationary gear. Did you look at the mobile gear in that capacity as well, at all? In terms of percent of trips in the different bins? And the reason I'm asking that is in New York, actually, most of our harvest is with beach seines rather than pound nets.
Yeah, so we did, but because the options are limited to stationary gears while fishing and they don't apply to the mobile gear types, we didn't include that information in the addendum because we had the PDT progress to moving on to specifically the stationary multi-species gears, which was the original intent of this adjustment to begin with. But we did look at it, we actually looked at it overall combined. I don't have the data in front of me, but given that the stationary gears accounted for a large percentage of the trips and the landings anyways, the smaller percentage of trips and landings coming from mobile gear types, I would anticipate to see similar patterns in the mobile gear data as we saw in the stationary gears, and that a lot of those trips, or at least a vast majority of the mobile gear trips, would be landing less than 1,000 pounds.
Next I have Bill Adler.
Yeah, first of all, if something like this goes through, is this only for the Chesapeake Bay, or is it for all of our states that may run into this particular problem with fixed, like nets? Does this apply to us all?
Yeah, so I realized that I highlighted a lot of examples from the Chesapeake Bay bill, but the options, even though this was commonly documented in the Bay, the use of multiple people on one vessel fishing together, the PDT took a broader look at it, and so it's not just limited to the Chesapeake Bay jurisdictions. All the options, depending on the different gear types that they identify, would apply to any state that had that gear type fishery for Menhaden within their state. So the short answer is no, it's not just limited to the Chesapeake Bay jurisdictions.
Additional questions for Mike? Yes, Jim.
I really hate to bring this up. Does this so we made a decision earlier to allow the bycatch for cast nets for the 2016 year. Does this change affect how we are doing that?
No, the only thing that this addendum considers changing is this allowance of 2 individuals to fish together from one vessel for stationary multi-species gears, and depending on which option is selected by the board, it would depend upon which gears are eligible or not. It does not deal with mobile gear types. We simply included that data in here to provide more perspective to the board about what gear types in totality are landing under the bycatch allowance.
Emerson?
Yes, relative to that question and the answer from Mike, my question is in terms of process. Is it inappropriate or too late at this time to include an option that speaks to specific mobile gear and doubling up on the trip limit?
It's not too late. I'll get to that in a second. That would be an addition to the addendum, and that the board would need to consider if you wanted to make that recommendation. I just want to make sure we've exhausted questions first, and then we'll get to potential changes to the document. Are there any further questions for Mike? Seeing none, Emerson, did you want to make that suggestion? And the way I'd like to proceed with regard to any suggested modifications is that we'll entertain the suggestion. We'll see if there's consensus on the part of the board to include it. If there is, we'll certainly make note of it and make sure it's included. If there is opposition or concern, we're going to vote on, we'll probably set it aside and then come back and vote on it. So first, I just want to get the issues on the table. And so, Emerson, if you have one that you'd like to offer, now's the time to do it.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I don't have a motion prepared. I'm just thinking of this on the fly here. But I'd like to include an option to allow Hall Seines / Beach Seines to participate in this program.
So I'm going to just let that marinate. I'm going to come back to the board as once we get our sort of laundry list of suggested changes, and we'll see how the board feels about them. Are there any other suggested changes? Yes, Steve Train.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm looking at this, and I'm just wondering if there's anybody else around this table that thinks we've made a mess of this since we thought we were overfished. I mean, this is a species that is not overfished. Overfishing's not occurring. We've got a uncounted bycatch that's twice what 6 states are fighting over to get a piece of, and it's not counted in anybody's quota. It's driving me crazy. I think we're trying to sleight of hand to try to make everybody happy, and we're supposed to be managing a fishery. I think we should add an option E that counts this in every state's quota, and if we have to move the quota up to accommodate it, we do it. But this hide this behind my back and don't tell them when we did it stuff, it's not the way we should manage fisheries.
Okay, so again, we'll come back to this, but I understand your suggestion to be that you would want an additional option that would modify the addendum by changing bycatch to landings that are subject to individual state quotas. Do I understand that correctly? Okay, thank you. And I'll come back to that. I just want to first get the issues on the table. Other issues that members of the board want to offer regarding this draft addendum? Changes to it? Yes.
I'm just curious, do you anticipate this increasing the bycatch amount? I'm trying to get my head around what this might do to the bycatch amount that we presently or historically get.
Mike, you want to take that?
Sure. I'll say that that is part of the reason that the technical committee liked that this was for limited entry fisheries, so meaning there's a cap on effort, and that is one of the options in the document, is that this only be allowed for gear types that have limited entry in place. Just to remind the board of a little bit of history, I didn't want to get bogged down on this, but I think it's relative to the question, is so Maryland and PRFC tried to pursue this through conservation equivalency, saying the plan currently allows 2 individuals to land 6,000 pounds separately. Can we allow them to land 12,000 pounds together? It is essentially the same, conservationally equivalent. And so the concern was, okay, will that increase the amount of landings now that we're allowing people to work together? And that is the reason the technical committee liked that that was limited entry, because it limited the ability for those landings to really exceed or really increase substantially. So we haven't fully evaluated this for some of the other options, Doug. But I mean, ultimately, I'm not sure, and this is something that the board members should think about. If some of their gear types were afforded this provision, would it really change how their fisheries operate? I think you all know that probably better than we do, because we just don't have a lot of information to draw that conclusion.
Lynn and then Rob.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think I'm going to start to sound a little bit like a broken record, but I feel compelled to go back to the genesis of this a little bit. When we initiated Amendment 2, in that very long discussion, we talked for a very long time about the impact of this on these non-selective stationary gears that are licensed to a site, so they can't move around and they get these big slugs of fish through. And in many cases, when you discard these fish from a pound net, they're dead. So it's a little bit like Jim's problem in New York. You got dead fish washing up on a beach. In the Chesapeake Bay, we have about 10 to 12 people who catch the majority of our Menhaden harvest. They work in families, so traditionally what they do is they go out in their boat in the morning. They're a father and a son, or a husband and a wife, and they go to one net, then the other. They fish together. And so what happens is, in our case, and the reason we brought this forward was that during the open Menhaden season, they're fishing communally, so they're fishing from the same vessel, and then when the fishery closes, they still want to get to both those nets. And so what they're doing is they're commissioning another vessel, and in some cases these are not particularly safe vessels, or if they are, they're doubling their fuel and their crew costs, because you don't really fish a pound net by yourself. It takes more than one person to work that gear, unless you're Superman or Superwoman. In Maryland, the bottom line is that these fish are going to be caught. They're going to do it. They're going to catch them, and if they catch them more efficiently for fuel and crew, we think that that's our responsibility to help them do that. I could not agree more with my colleague down the table that it's absurd that we have this. We're in this situation now with this bycatch allowance that doesn't count toward a TAC. I think we all realize the issues with that, and I think Amendment 3, we need to keep our eye on the Amendment 3 ball. We have a lot of real logistical management problems with the Menhaden right now, and I think we all have a really good sense of what they are now. We've learned a lot in the last few years, and I think it's going to really empower us to go forward with Amendment 3. So again, this addendum, we were hoping to do this through conservation equivalency because we are going to catch the fish. We couldn't do that, so we requested to initiate this addendum. I would really, really appeal to the board not to make this issue more complicated by adding gears and everything else. I understand. I will say it's a very, it is a real problem for these big stationary gears that don't move. So thank you for listening.
Thank you, Lynn. Rob?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple of quick points to Mike's question about the states knowing more how they would handle sort of a system of bycatch and what it would detail. It would detail a lot of extra effort. You know, although there are limited entry systems, there certainly are ways that we don't know about all the states and what they do and who's going to be participating, who's going to be motivated to take care of what has happened with a truncated supply. So that's one thing. The other thing is Steve Frame is absolutely right. As we move forward with Amendment 3, we should look for quotas. I mean, we have, you know, built a house and added all these different parts to it, and it's becoming that when one part sags, then we're going to go and fix that part, and then another part sags. It really is cumbersome. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense. The other part here is just to respond to capacity. We had about 7, maybe 8 calls that Robert Boyles led on allocation, and they were good calls, but very early on, my recognition was when people were talking about capacity, they were talking about what existed then, several months ago. And I was always thinking about capacity, what really is it that everyone needs for their capacity? And one of the big challenges, and it shouldn't be a real burden, is for this board to address that through Amendment 3. What is the capacity? What is the growth that is expected? Because as soon as we clamp down on the supply, problems just started erupting everywhere. If the assessment had such a glowing picture, and by the time we get down the road to 2018 we have an update and it's the same, you know, by the time we get to Amendment 3, we ought to meld that in. What we're doing now today is symptomatic of a system where the main emphasis was to reduce quota, you know, establish a TAC, reduce quotas, and everyone even knew back in December of 2012 that the bycatch was squirrely. It was sort of a problem even then, and it's a bigger problem now. So the last thing I'll say is practical about pound nets. So in Virginia, we didn't ask for this to be included in this addendum. In our system, we have licensees. One licensee might have 15 pound nets, but he's the licensee or she's the licensee, and they're responsible for the bycatch, regardless of how many nets they fish. And that's the way we operate. We are less volume than Maryland, but at the same time, there are differences, and that's why we're not in the addendum. It's just the way the fishery operates. It has, as Lynn indicates, a crew, and they do help out with the harvesting, obviously. It is a challenge to fish a pound net, and you know, so I mean, there are differences even regionally within the Chesapeake Bay. So thank you.
Thank you. Russ Allen?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll echo some of the things that Lynn had to say regarding the pound netters that also we do for the anchored gill netters, their families, their fathers, sons, brothers, whatever, that are trying to pick up a few extra menhaden when they can, certain times of the year. And I'm sympathetic to what Emerson's talking about with seines, but if you open up this to mobile gear, I think you're also going to add in drift gill netters, and that just sends us down a path that I don't think we want to get to. Like I said, I'm sympathetic to what New York has to say there. I'd rather we stick with just this fixed gear thought process for this addendum and move on. There's been enough comment about we really need to get our act together, so somewhere down the line we need to do that, but we have something in front of us that we spent a lot of time on at the last meeting discussing and making sure that everything was going to be in this that we needed in there, and now we're talking about adding more gears in there that I don't think we want to go down. So thank you.
Thank you. I have Kyle Schick next.
Rob basically said most of what I wanted to say, but also I think these additional gears can be addressed, in August when we raise. I think that's what we need to do. I mean, we're all talking about, again, 1%, 2%. We raise the TAC, all these problems go away. Now, this is a situation we probably need to do. I have no problem with it. It's calling something that's not. It's not bycatch. I mean, this is catch. This is catch. It should be included, and we need to raise the TAC, and we need to do what is right. With all of this type of stuff, and that way mobile gears get what they need, states get what they need, everybody gets what they need, and problem's gone. So let's just get through this and go forward, and then really think about what the real prize is, and that's getting it right, and think about raising the TAC and getting Amendment 3 nailed down so everybody has the fish that they need.
Thank you. So seeing no hands, I do want to try and wrap this up. Are there any other suggested changes to the document that anyone on the board wishes to make? I'm going to go back to the two that were suggested, but first I just want to make sure we've got the issues covered. I don't see any indication of any further suggestions. So let me go back first to Emerson, your suggestion. There's been some good discussion on the issue. I think you've heard some of the board's thoughts and comments on it. Do you wish to advance that as a proposed change to the addendum? If so, I'm going to need it in the form of a motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I'm prepared to make a motion to that effect.
Go ahead.
So I would move to add an option that allows working together permitted for all stationary gear as well as haul/beach seines.
Is there a second to that motion? Seeing no second, the motion fails for lack of a second. Steve, let me go to your issue. Do you wish to advance that in the form of a motion?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm still thinking. After listening, I think we can wait for Amendment 3 to get to that, so I'd be happy to not move that forward at this point.
Thank you. That makes me happy as well. We now need a motion to approve Addendum 1 for comment. There's been no modifications made today, so it would be, as presented to the board today, but we don't really need to say that. Well, we can say that. So I would be looking for a motion that moves approval of Addendum 1 for public comment as presented to the board at its May 2016 meeting. I see Bill Adler's hand up. Bill?
I'll make that motion.
So is there a second?
What you said?
Thank you. And we'll look to staff to make sure they get it right. And I see Dave Simpson as a second. So moved by Bill Adler, seconded by Dave Simpson. Let's wait for the motion to get up on the board. Bill, are you comfortable with that wording? I believe it's consistent with what I had suggested. I believe we've had a very healthy discussion on the issue. Is there any further discussion on the motion? This does require a vote. I don't think well, I'll give you 15 seconds to caucus. 15-second caucus. Okay, ready? I'm going to call the question, and Mike will make note of the tally. All in favor, please raise your hand. Opposed, like sign. Null votes. Abstentions. The motion carries unanimously. I'm going to go back to Mike for one quick clarification. He wants to make sure that the information in the document is accurate. Mike?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I mentioned this during my presentation, but I just wanted to highlight it again and point out that Appendix 1 is a table from all the states and jurisdictions about what the bycatch limit is, whether a state further defines non-directed fisheries, and the most important column in there, as I mentioned, is the stationary gear types that are limited entry. And because one of the options specifically says that it would only be for stationary gear types that have limited entry, it is important that the states correctly identify which gear types in that table are limited entry so that when the public comments on this, they can adequately know which gear types have limited entry in place. So please see me by, I don't know, let's say the end of today if that table is not correct, as we will look to publish this document very quickly to get it out for public comment. And then also, if you would be interested in conducting a public hearing on this document, please let us know, or please let Megan and Tina know so that we can schedule that and get it announced to the public. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And then I think the last issue here is the issue of whether states wish to conduct public hearings on this addendum. I think Mike would benefit by knowing either now, well, let's say now, for those state, Mike, do you want to just, with a show of hands, is that how you'd like to proceed on this?
I think it's just best if you email us on that same time frame. If you know you're going to want a hearing, email us by the end of today, tomorrow, so that we know sort of how to plan and we can try to schedule them appropriately. So I don't need a show of hands right now, but just let us know quickly so that we can start working on the logistics. Thank you.
Thank you. So we are now on to the next agenda item. We're running a little bit behind, so I just want to urge us to try to move through these last few agenda items as quickly as possible. The next item is providing guidance to the technical committee regarding stock projections. This was mentioned earlier, and now we're at that point. I believe Jason McNamee has a presentation, so at this point I'll turn it over to Jason.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to get into brutal, gory detail on assessment stock projections here. Just kidding, Mr. Chairman. I know I will go very quickly. So it came to our attention that there may be a need to update our projections. We did some a couple years ago after the benchmark, but we became aware that there may be a need to update those. And so I'm just going to quickly go through what's behind the projections very quickly. And just give you a sense of the feedback that we need from you all to move forward in the most expedient manner possible. So the easiest thing for the technical folks to do would be to use the output from the BAM model. This is the Beaufort assessment model, the peer review approved model we use for Menhaden, and to also use the projection methodology that was detailed in that last peer review. And I'll hit a a couple of the assumptions. We use some functional forms to describe some of the population dynamics. I'm talking about things like selectivity and recruitment. So this would be a curve like a dome-shaped selectivity curve. So those things are already built into there, and we would not be inclined to change them unless somebody wanted us to. So median recruitment is another big assumption that we used in our projections. Another big one is that the allocation remains the same moving forward. This is the allocation that occurs between bait and reduction. And then finally, what the main point here is, does the board want us to revisit all these things? You can see them itemized up there, or are you comfortable? We kind of hashed this out the last go around. Do you want us to hash that out again, or are you comfortable with our original decisions, and would you like us to move forward with those? So keep that question in the back of your mind as I tick through these next slides. The one thing that we can change and update is the catch input. So we know what happened in 2014 and 2015, so we can use the actual catch information rather than the assumptions that we made the first time before those years occurred. We also, for the time frame of the projections, we used a pretty short time frame. We used 2015 through 2017. The reason for that is Menhaden aren't a very long-lived species, in particular in current times. So we wanted to keep at least one observed data point in the projections, and so that's why we only ran it through 2017. We can go beyond that if you'd like, but what you lose at that point is an observed data point, one of those cohorts kind of moving through. So this is some of the projection runs that we ran last time. And so the very first one, status quo, that was the reduction from the historical time period. So that's the TAC that we were operating under back in 2015. We ran then a series of runs relative to that historical time period, the reduction from that historical time period. And so you can see in the table there, the first set of rows is the percent risk of exceeding the F target, and you can see, depending on which of those TACs we ran, there are varying degrees of risk. And then the last one was a constant TAC to achieve an F target in 2017. So you kind of look out into the future and say, at that year, certain we want to be at some assumed risk percentage. At the time, it was chosen at 50%, and I'll come back to that in a moment. So how about projection runs for 2017? We can update projections to show different catch scenarios. However, the quickest, most expedient, the most efficient thing we could do is if the board picks some TACs that they want to see, rather than have us run 5,000 different iterations of TACs that run the gambit that you will then have to struggle to think about. You can offer us some very specific advice, and we can move forward with that advice. That's the most efficient thing for your technical folks. So I just offer that editorial, I guess. So you can offer status quo. That's what we had in 2016. That was that 10% increase from the 20% reduction from the historical catch. You can also, again, provide us specific advice for attack, or you could give us the advice that you'd like to see attack that will achieve a F target in 2017. So what we need, and again, this is another one to kind of stash in the back of your head as you make your decisions on this, we need a risk level. We chose 50% last time, we being the technical committee. We did that because we did not have any advice otherwise, and it's sort of a a standard that is used for a lot of different species. If you don't like that, we would need that guidance to alter that. Just a couple slides here on caveats, and these are, caveats. This is the fine print at the bottom of the commercial here, and these are for all projections for all species ever. So projections are highly uncertain. They do not include structural model uncertainty, so it's the only thing that propagates forward is some of the uncertainties that are specified in the model, but not the underlying structural uncertainty. They are conditional on a set of functional forms, so for selectivity and recruitment, you just have a functional form that you plug into your projections and run forward with. The fisheries were assumed and will be assumed to continue at current proportions of allocation between bait and reduction. This is important because it interacts with the selectivity for each of those different fishing sectors, I guess. So new management regs that alter the proportions, they would have impacts on the projections. If future recruitment is characterized by runs of large or small year classes kind of in a row, that would affect the performance of the projections. Again, we're assuming median recruitment, so if things don't happen at that kind of normal level, that will affect the performance of the projections. And then the final point here is that the projections apply the Baranov catch equation, so that basically assumes mortality occurs all year long. So if you put in something like a seasonal closure or something like that, that will alter the performance of the projection, because that's not one of the assumptions that we've made. Also, if the fishery is occurring, at specific times during the year, that would also impact that. But we're using the Baranov catch equation, assumes mortality is occurring all year. And that is my whirlwind tour of the projection methodology. So just before we get into questions from you, we need to confirm that we are okay moving forward with the assumptions that we used the last go around. If people want that to be different, we would need that specific advice. That would create a delay, just so you are aware, because we'd need to rehash that out. If you specify a TAC, you specify specific numbers you want us to see, that will save us running additional unneeded or unwanted runs. And so the more specific you are there, the more efficient we can be. And if a constant catch or a constant F approach is desired, we would prefer that you give us a specific level of risk. So we want that F target to be at 50% or some other value. We used 50% last time. So, Mr. Chairman, that's it from me.
Thank you, Jason. Excellent presentation, and thank you very much for sort of wrapping it together at the end there with the three key issues, and that is the assumptions, whether the board is comfortable maintaining the same assumptions as were used previously, whether the board wishes to specify TAC levels, and if so, what those levels should be, and if the board wants to utilize a constant F, what level of risk the board wants to use. I believe 50% was used previously. So this is what we're looking for is board consensus here. This won't be an issue subject to vote, but it is important for the board to provide as guidance as specific as possible to ensure that we do return in August with the information that the board wants and needs in order to take up the issue of specifications. Specification setting for 2017, which is really which is the issue that this underlies or overlies, I guess you would say. So with that, I look to the board for comments and suggestions. David Borden.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman. I make two suggestions. I'd like to see the level of risk analyzed at the 50% level, and then some higher level, just so we know how sensitive the assumptions are to that. So if, for instance, they do 50% and 55 or 60%, I'm just picking numbers, I think there would be benefit in doing that. And then the other suggestion would be for for us to look at a range of different options on the bait reduction allocation. I can envision as we move forward with Menhaden management, there's going to be an extensive discussion on that relationship, and I think we should understand what the impacts are. Thank you.
Thank you. Additional comments, suggestions? Rob O'Reilly. I'm sorry, Rob, can you hold for a second? I should have given Jason the opportunity to respond. I'll probably do that on each issue. Jason.
Yep, I just want to clarify. So, Dave, you said 50%, and then you offered 55 and 60%. So just to clear, I'm going to, it's the inverse. So to be less risky by an additional 5% and 10% is what you meant.
You are correct. It's cold medication.
Now to you, Rob.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I think respond to a couple things. One, the 50% is something that was recently used in a manner with striped bass, where the expectation was there'd be a 50% probability of achieving the target F. It also has a basis in the courts going back to 1993, where the 50% standard was looked for with summer flounder. So I think that's a reasonable approach. The situation with the median, Jason sounded a little bit foreboding about that, but I guess that's something that you wait and see how things react. I think he described it well, that if you have unusual recruitment in either direction compared to the median, then that's going to be problematic. But I guess that was what the committee, technical committee, and the stock assessment subcommittee lighted on back a while ago. I am going to say that Jason said their job would be easier if they knew what a TAC would be, and I think as a boundary, when we look at this and I listen to what happened today and some of the comments since 2012, one thing to look at is what the TAC was or should have been if there was no reduction back in 2012, plus anything that has happened with this bycatch allowance. So, some may not think that's even an upward boundary, but at least if we're going to look at this, we should look at different parts of this, including where we stand now, where the capacity might take us. And I was really sort of bent out of shape, I guess, back in February of 2015, when we never really had a chance as a board to go over the various scenarios that the technical committee presented. I mean, I know we could read about them, but there really was no discussion. The board jumped out with an option pretty quickly, and that evaporated any discussion about risk. And we had, information about risk back then, risk to the population from various increases that I think went from 10 to 40% back at that time of where we were after the reduction in 2012. So I hope that's clear that we should look for that situation with prior to the reduction, plus what we have done with other aspects we've talked about. We're moving into an area of Amendment 3 where even the episodic might need to be revamped, the bycatch, everything else. So I think we can at least look at an upper bound, and someone else, again, might not think that's an upper bound for a TAC.
Thank you, Rob. Dave Simpson.
Yeah, maybe Jay can help me. I thought the projection, you asked for advice on what TAC we may want to see, but I thought that would come out of the risk probability, or probability of not exceeding the target F, so that if we you do that run, what TAC can we take with a 50% chance of exceeding the quota? Could you respond to that? And I was thinking the upper bound would be, and then 75% certainty that we would achieve the TAC, would not exceed the TAC.
Jason?
Yeah, thanks, Dave. I think you're right. So that is very specific advice. If you said we want you to, meet and not exceed the F target by some risk level in 2017, that's a single run. So that's what I was getting at. Even more direct is if you said we want, a 10% increase from today or whatever the board's desire was. So anything that is that specific is helpful to us.
You want to follow, Dave?
Yeah, so I think that would make sense to see what the TAC would be if we use the 50% probability, and then maybe others have other amounts to offer.
Thank you. And Lynn Fagley.
Thank you. So, Jason, I hate to bring this up. I'm going to feel like a little bit of an idiot, but when we talk about a TAC that would achieve the target with some probability, are we talking about the target that came out of the 2014 assessment, or are we talking about the target before that? They were different, right? So that, because I don't know that we adopted officially the target.
I think Mike's going to take that.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Jay, for letting me jump in. So, yeah, it's the reference points that came out of the 2015 benchmark stock assessment that we finished at the end of 14, and the board has accepted those for management use, and those are the ones that we're using when we talk about the targets and thresholds in Jay's presentation.
Lynn, do you have a follow, or are you okay?
No, thank you. That was my question. Thanks.
Richie White.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think I saw on a slide that you said that the run would be subject to the same percentage bait and reduction. And if that was going to change, then you'd need to know that. So I guess I would ask that the run include a change in that being an increase in bait, and I guess I would look for help around the table to come up with the amount of change.
Oh, yeah, Jason?
Yep. So I understand, Richie, what you're getting at, and so just to clarify, it's using the catch that we have realized, so that's what the model then kind of runs forward with existing. So what you'd be asking for is a simulation of some sort that increases that on some trajectory, and so now we're getting into a realm where we would have to have discussion, and I don't know, we could do that, but I'm suggesting, I don't know if that would be a long discussion. The more advice that you could provide us would make it quicker, so you want it to go up by 5% or something like that. So I just want to clarify that it does use the existing, what's happening now, but then it makes the assumption that carries forward.
I guess I would add a 5%, but I'd also look for some advice around the table, what other percentages states might think would be appropriate.
Okay. Yeah, Mike wants to jump in.
So I'm thinking on the fly, and Jay, correct me if I'm wrong. And so if you run a projection that changes the distribution of harvest between bait and reduction, you're essentially changing the allocation of the fishery, okay? And so in order for that projection to make sense in reality, you have to also change the allocation in the fishery to match that projection. So ultimately what I'm trying to get at is, I think what you're talking about is a projection that looks at a change in allocation, which I'm not saying that we couldn't show the board. I'm just saying that that doesn't match where we currently are at with managing the Menhaden fishery, because we already have allocation in place that determines what that breakdown between bait and reduction is. And Jay, I think, can you jump in if I misstepped there?
Yep, no, you didn't misstep, Mike. I don't know that. So the importance of it in the projection methodology is the selectivities are different between the two fisheries, the two fleets. And so when you shift some of the catch into a different selectivity, it impacts the outcome. And so it's not, it has unintended consequences as well. And so it's kind of a heady decision, I guess is what I'm getting at. It's not necessarily, yeah, just check it out and see what it looks like. It is that, but it's changing because of these underlying specifications that we've made to the projection methodology.
Richie, a follow, or are you good?
Yeah, I guess I don't have my arms totally around this. So I guess I'd look at, see if there's support from other states to do this.
I'll go to Lynn next.
So I wonder, given the conversations that we've had with Eels and Menhaden, where we know we've got states who have been underreported, so if I understand the allocation is between bait and reduction is based on what's been reported, I think we would all agree that the reduction fleet has potentially been better reported than the bait. So I guess my question is, to Richie's point, is there a way, if we do the projections based on this allocation that is based on underreported bait landings, are we setting ourselves up to be in the same spot that we've been in and we are in with other fisheries? And now, knowing what we know with better reporting, is there a way to estimate what the magnitude of that underreporting might have been in the bait fishery and scale it up and see what the impacts are? I'd be curious to hear other people's thoughts on that.
Dave?
Yeah, my thought is that's something we definitely want to look at through Amendment 3, but maybe this is a little bit early for doing that. But come Amendment 3, I think we could develop some specificity on what we'd like to look at. So I think better to hold off on that for this go-around, this particular exercise.
Yeah, thanks. I was thinking the same thing. I want to make sure the board is cognizant of the fact that what we're going to be doing in August is setting specifications for the 2017 fishery pursuant to the existing Amendment 2 program, and then taking up potential changes to the program next year through the Amendment 3 process. So, I mean, some of what I'm hearing today seems to be, as I think Dave was indicating, knocking on the door of changes to allocation, which are going to be ripe for discussion next year, but not necessarily, in fact, probably not at all this year. So keep that in mind as you're thinking through this, this issue of advice. Rob O'Reilly?
Thanks, and I know I already had a chance, but I think what Dave had to say gives me a better situation of what Jay is really after, but I'm still in the hopes that there'll be something similar to what we had in February of 2015. In other words, back then it was risk involved, but also with a 10%, 20%, 30%, and 40% increase in the TAC. And is that something that's still reproducible through the projections? So I guess that's a question for Jay, maybe.
Yeah, so just so it's clear, that isn't what we did last time. It's a nuanced difference, but, you know, because you saw 5, 10, 15, it was up there, right? But what they were all relative to that historical time period. So what you'd be asking for is something different, but it's very specific, and we could certainly do that, you know, increase from, you should tell us where you want to increase from now, perhaps by 10%, 15%, whatever that is. We can do that. While I have the floor still, Mr. Chair, one thing from the comment that Dave Simpson made earlier, I appreciated the specification of the risk level, but the date at which, so one of the questions we had is, is 2017 okay, or do you want us to go out further? I think we would suggest 2017 is probably where you want to be at, but specifying a date is also important.
Okay, I want to try to pull this together. It's been a very good discussion. I think the key, though, is clarity and specificity with regard to what the board wants the TC to do regarding its work on stock projections for 2017 to be brought back to the board at its August meeting. And I really think now's the time to try to pull together some firm recommendations that speak to perhaps the comments that have already been made, but give Jason the guidance that he's seeking from the board. So I'm really looking for a wrap-up right now, but I'm looking for it in the form of sort of final recommendations. We're trying to do this on a consensus basis, so I don't want to get into voting on these issues, but I do want to make sure that those who have strong feelings about the issues offer their suggestions as clearly as possible, and then I'll look to the board for consensus. I'll go to Dave and then Rob O'Reilly. Dave?
Yeah, so the other I think that would make sense would be to do the status quo quota, 187,000 tons. What would the probability of exceeding the FB? I think that would be a good bound for me.
Rob?
So I think it's solidified, but that plus a 10, 20, 30, and 40% increase, because I think we need to see that. We didn't really get a chance to see that before. I thank Jay for educating me a little bit, and that's my recommendation.
And Rob, those increases are from where?
From now, current TAC.
Thank you. I think that was that's important to clarify. Richie?
Trying to still come to grips with what I'm trying to accomplish. What if there was an increase in the overall quota in August that was by state, such that then changed the allocation between reduction and bait? So from that standpoint, is it worth looking at what I originally asked?
Richie, I'm equally having trouble wrapping my head around how that's not a management change from the allocations that we've already included in Amendment 2. And so there is an allocation percentage that is assigned to every state based off their landings history from 2009 through 2011. And so that percent is how we take the TAC, which is the numbers we're talking about, and then just multiply those state percentages, and that's what determines what each state gets. And so what I'm thinking you're suggesting actually ends up being a change to allocation, which would require a management document to achieve.
Rob, I'm wondering if I could suggest, I think you had offered a 10, 20, 30, 40 sequencing of increases. I'm wondering if I could add in a 5% to that. Well, I'm going to suggest to the board that we add in 5, and I say that because I think 5 represents essentially something that I think I heard you offering, Rob, initially, and that is capturing bycatch plus episodic. And that's being generous, to be honest with you, 5%, but it at least knocks on that door, if you will, of sort of where we are currently, plus bycatch, plus potentially an increase in episodic. That would be a 5% increase, and then to your suggestion, it would go up from there. But I'd like to suggest that as an additional target, if you will, to ask the TC to report back on. So that's my suggestion. Additional suggestions, and then I'm going to look to Jason to see if he has enough or whether he needs to prod us for more. And if so, then I'm going to join him in prodding. Jason?
So Mike's jotting stuff down here. It looks pretty specific. And so we've got status quo, and then we have these incremental increases, 5, to 40. So that is now 6 runs, and then the 7th run would be having a 50% probability, the TAC that would have a 50% probability of not exceeding, I don't know, of achieving the F target. It's the same at 50% in 2017. So I think that feels pretty specific and actionable for me.
Awesome. Thank you very much for that discussion. Is there anything more on this issue? I think we definitely got the job done. Thank you for that. And roll up your sleeves and get ready for our August meeting, at which this will be coming back, and we'll be taking it up in the form of specification setting for 2017.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman. Sorry. So early in the discussion, Dave Borden had suggested a couple of different risk levels. So will we try those as well? It was, he suggested 50, 45, and 40.
So without objection, we'll add those to the list. And it sounds like Jason is comfortable with now a more fully rounded list of scenarios to be run. Does that cover it? Is there anything more to be discussed on this issue? Seeing no indication, I'll move on to the next agenda item, which is, I believe, a brief report on the progress being made by the Biological Ecological Working Group, aka BERP, and I believe Shanna Matson has a presentation on that. Shanna?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I've got 5 minutes. I'm going to try to take 3. So if you guys remember, our last BERP work group update was at the annual meeting, and at that time we reported out on the outcome of the Ecosystem Management Objectives workshop, and then the subsequent BERP meeting where we kind of identified the intersection of those goals with the modeling approaches that the work group was considering. The board did recommend that the BERP move forward with these ERP modeling approaches, so the work group subsequently met in March to put together a general timeline, and we also heard some updates on a few of our outside modeling approaches. So if you'll recall, our last single species assessment was completed at the end of 2014, and so the 5-year trigger for the next benchmark would be 2019. So working backwards, the group kind of recommended that we put the multi-species modeling assessment at the end of 2019, which would put us on the same timeline as a typical single species assessment. We also recommended that throughout this time period, we would update the board on our progress when appropriate during our spring meeting and our annual meetings. So I just want to give everyone a quick reminder that this is kind of the first time that we're attempting to do this level of multi-species modeling. We're looking at a total of 4 models currently to generate ERPs. So this 5-year time frame is a very ambitious timeline. We typically complete only 1 model for a single species in that time frame. So we're definitely going to be working hard to stick to this timeline, but I think flexibility is going to be crucial as, you know, we run into any hiccups. I am forever optimistic, so I am cautiously confident in our ability to, however, get that completed in 2019. So I'm going to go ahead and dig a little bit deeper here as to what we'll be doing during this time frame. So essentially in 2016 and 2017, we're holding this new thing that we're calling modeling workshops. And so essentially what we want to do is have all of our modeling leads come in and kind of present on what the back end of their model looks like. And this should really help to increase our committee understanding of these modeling approaches, and we hope that it'll also kind of increase our efficiency so we can work together to divide and conquer tasks among those modeling approaches. Also at that time, I think it'll be the place for the committee to really dig in and make a final decision on if that model should move forward and be evaluated in 2019 at that benchmark. We also hope that we can kind of sit down, hash out potential data sources, and that'll really help to populate our future data workshops. So essentially, as we're moving through these modeling workshops, we'll really be able to populate our timeline further out and get some greater detail there. And so in 2018, we're anticipating 2 data workshops. Again, remember that's kind of due to the number of modeling approaches and the fact that we're going to have so many data sources. We're not just looking at data sources for one species. We're going to be looking at data sources for multiple predator species, for multiple prey species. So we're really going to need those 2 data workshops to kind of compile all that data and hash it out and get it together. Then in 2019, we will start holding our assessment workshops. Again, I've got 2 scheduled in that time frame, as well as the benchmark. So, you know, at those assessment workshops, we'll start to look at base runs and really nail down all of those final details. And so what we'll be doing coming up, we've got a July modeling workshop. This will be our first modeling workshop. Currently, we have a subcommittee who is working to convert one of our modeling approaches into a format that's a little bit more easily accessible to the work group. And then in July, we'll hold that modeling workshop looking at Jim Uphoff's Steele-Henderson model. And we hope to hear some progress updates from our 3 other modeling approaches during that time frame. And then we should have some updates for you guys again at the annual meeting. And so with that, I would be happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Shanna. Questions for Shanna? Rob.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Shanna. And the item about the external model preparation, what exactly is involved there? And is that something where recruitment from outside has already taken place? I wasn't sure what. Yes? Okay.
So essentially we have 2 external models that are being developed right now. One is actually by Jenny Nesledge, and one is by Andre Buheister with, well, he was with CBL. And so those were already being externally developed prior to when we started, you know, working, and we've been working with the 2 of them closely to kind of monitor their progress and have them come in and give us reports and updates as well.
Additional questions, Emerson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Shanna, for your presentation. What's the difference between the 4 models? Is it the number of species that they can look at? Are there differences in how they model the interaction between species? If you can provide some oversight on the difference, that would be helpful. Thank you.
I think the answer to that question would be yes. There is a lot of differences between all 4 of the models. You know, one is actually Jay's model. He's working on a multi-species statistical catch days, so that's something, a framework that we're a little bit more you know, used to. But that kind of ranges out to like an EcoPath with EcoSim model, which is just a very large model that can incorporate way more species than we would be incorporating into the multi-species statistical catch at age model. So really there are a wide range of differences between those modeling approaches. So we really hope to kind of hone in on what those differences are, what they're producing, and kind of what that gives us in the form of ERPs, and hopefully kind of find some sort of common ground.
Follow?
Yes, follow up. Thank you. I noticed in your schedule that the data workshop or workshops are going to follow the decision of which model is going to be used. But I'm guessing that these different models are going to need different levels and different intensities of data. So what happens if you choose a model and then find out you don't have the data, enough data to really inform that model to be productive?
So the models are already developed to the point that we pretty much understand what those data sources are going to be. And so I think that we'll be able to kind of make that determination during those modeling workshops, since we will be discussing the potential data sources and the draws and how long it'll take to actually you know, make sure that we've covered all ground that we need for those approaches. So, you know, I hope that we're really able to make that determination during those modeling workshops, but should the committee feel uncomfortable and kind of want to wait until a later date during the data workshop, I don't really see a problem with that either.
Further questions for Shanna? Seeing none, thank you, Shanna, for that report, and we'll move on to item 8, considering, and that's board consideration of approval of 2016 FMP review and state compliance. States were required to submit their compliance plans by April 1. The PDT reviewed those plans and reported out via the FMP review, which is in the meeting materials. I'll now call upon Mike to summarize that report. Mike?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I'll jump right into this. We are operating under Amendment 2, surprise. It was implemented in 2013. It established a TAC that was increased for 2015 from 13 and 14. That TAC is 414.2 million pounds. We have that 1% set aside for episodic events. The allocation is based off that 3-year time frame. We have transfer of quotas. We have this bycatch allowance that we talked about. We carried forward the reduction cap, or the reduction fishery harvest cap in the bay. It does timely reporting to minimize overages, and it has an improved biological component part. So this slide just summarizes some of the things that have occurred since Amendment 2. I went through all of that, and this is actually action we took today, all on the episodic event stuff, so I won't go through that again, but just letting the board know that the board, through board action, had made continuous changes to that program. So moving on to status of the stock, Amendment 2 were interim reference points that were put in based on maximum spawning potential. I have graded those out because there were new recommended reference points that came out of the benchmark stock assessment that the peer review panel approved and also the technical committee recommended. The board accepted those for management use, and so as shown as our screen, those are our threshold and targets. So using the new recommended reference points, the stock has not overfished and overfishing is not occurring. Those are still interim reference points while ERPs are being developed, and you know that Amendment 3 will consider those reference points along with ERPs that are available. So 2015 status of the fishery, our TAC is there. Our total harvest, excluding the bycatch, was just underneath the TAC. It's a 10.5% increase from 2014, but that should come as no surprise because the board increased the TAC by about that amount in the year. The bycatch harvest was 5.9 million pounds. That represents 1.4 of the coast-wide, but doesn't count towards the TAC, as we talked about. And then, so combining it all, total harvest, including the bycatch, is just over 416 million pounds. So we have a reduction fishery and a bait fishery. So for reduction purposes, there were 316.2 million pounds landed. That's a 9.5% increase from 2014 and about a 2% decrease from the previous 5-year average. And then the bait harvest was 92.5 million pounds, and that's about a 10% increase from 2014 and a 10.4% decrease from the previous 5-year average. Once again, those increases, no surprise, because the TAC went up by that amount. This is just a landings figure that shows what I just talked about. Bait landings is in red, reduction in blue. Notice the difference of the scales. And then I went through this bycatch analysis table in the addendum, so it's the same table, so I won't do that again. But what's driving these patterns, as we talked about, pound nets in Maryland and PRFC and gill nets in Virginia make up a bulk of that. And then in terms of the trips, a lot of these trips landing under 1,000 pounds for bycatch. So episodic events, we have 3 states that are qualified. They have to implement all those mandatory provisions that we talked about. Only Rhode Island declared participation. They harvested less than 1.9 million pounds, and the unused set aside that was left over was reallocated on November 1 to the rest of the states. So this slide shows, it's a table in your FMP review that really sort of is the accounting of everything that happened in 2015. And so it shows the quota transfers that occurred. It shows what the total 2015 quota was after the set-aside got reallocated and all that. It shows the 2015 landings, and it shows what overages remained at the end of the year. There is no requirement in terms of timing of transfers. So there are these states that have overages are actually in the process of transfers as we speak. And so this may change depending on the transfers that occur, but I'll tell you about the ones that have already occurred. So Massachusetts transferred quota to both New York and Rhode Island to cover their overages. But overages occurred in 4 states. So Florida and Rhode Island were high because, were over because high daily landings rates relative to their small quotas made it difficult for them to close the quota and not go over a little. New Jersey had some delinquent dealer reports, which was the reason for their overage. And New York's reporting time frame is on a monthly basis, so it was challenging for them to close. Once again, a timing issue. So the PRT just wanted to bring to the board's attention, New York has monthly reporting, but has capability of requiring weekly reporting if needed, and just mentioning that New York had a quota overage in 14 and 15. All other states implemented timely reporting. This table just shows 2015 biosamples. So as part of a requirement in Amendment 2 to get more data flowing into the stock assessment, we have a biosampling requirement based on the amount of landings that a state has. And so this table outlines what that looked like for 2015. And the take-home note is that all the states were or have collected the required samples that they needed to based off their landings. So that's great. We're getting good length and age information from that data that goes directly into the stock assessment. So that's really helpful and useful. There's an index requirement, no compliance issues with that, so we'll skip that slide. The Chesapeake Bay reduction harvest cap, as I remember, this was already in place when we were considering all those changes in Amendment 2, and so Amendment 2 just reduced that harvest cap by 20%. The reduction fishery consistently underperforms that harvest cap, meaning their harvest is below the cap in the Chesapeake Bay, and in 2015 they reported approximately less than 50,000 metric tons. So there's a rollover provision as part of this, and you see that what their TAC is for 2016. And then we had de minimis requests from the states of New York, Pennsylvania, South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida. They qualify because their bait landings don't exceed 1% of the total coastwide bait landings. And as a result, the PRT recommends that the board accept or approve de minimis requests by those states. So there's a couple of recommendations that I'll wrap up with. One, we're looking for the board to accept the 2015 FMP review for Menhaden, and that the board just consider the reporting timeframe of New York to minimize future quota overages, and that they also consider those de minimis requests. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mike. I guess on behalf of the board, I'll ask Jim regarding this recommendation. Is New York considering your reporting timeframe issue?
Mr. Chairman, I can change the reporting time frames, but it's the allocation that's the problem. So yeah, I can report sooner that I'm going to be over my allocation. Well, so yeah, we can report, especially if we're getting the episodic event. We're going to do a daily reporting. So yeah, we'll see if we can improve that.
Thank you for that. Additional questions from Mike regarding his presentation. Emerson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Not directly related to the report, but related to the issue. I heard a little bit of discussion around the table earlier today about another extremely strong year class for Menhaden. Do we have any information on that you can share with us? Thank you.
Mike?
Yeah, we admittedly, we do not annually update the indices that we use in the stock assessment. So I can't, we didn't pull that information together for the F&P review. We usually pull that information during assessment years. 2017 will actually be an update assessment for Menhaden, and so we will be pulling that information for next year. And it's simply because of the timing, right? So remember that the compliance reporting date for Menhaden is pretty early in the year because we needed to set specifications, et cetera. So reporting out on those indices can be a challenge at time on that short reporting time frame, but I will tell you that we update them for the assessments. But if you wanted them sooner, we could try to find a time to make that effective with when the data become available.
Thank you. Any further questions? Dave Simpson?
Not on this, but just in terms of the projections and setting quotas, and the review reminded me of this. There's nothing that would prevent us in setting the quota for 2017 from considering what the landings are if they exceeded the TAC by a couple thousand tons or something, to adopt a quota that anticipated a similar overage next year.
Fair comment, I think. Additional comments or questions? If not, I would entertain a motion to accept the FMP review and approve de minimis status for New Hampshire, Pennsylvania, South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida. Bill Adler?
Moved.
Moved by Bill Adler. Is there a second? Seconded by Steve Train. Miraculously, we have the motion up exactly as indicated. Is there any further discussion on the motion? Is there any objection to the motion? Seeing no objection, the motion is approved by consent. And we're on to item 9, the election of a vice chair. Do we have any nominations for vice chair? Cherie.
Yes, I would like to nominate Russ Allen for vice chair of the Menhaden Management Board.
Is there a second to that? Seconded by Jim Gilmore. Jim?
I'm going to pretend I'm Pat Augustine. I second the motion and close all future nominations and approve the appointment of our new vice chairman.
Russ, I just have to ask, do you have enough delegates, or did you run as an independent?
I'll leave you up in the air on that one.
Is there any objection to the motion to appoint Russ Allen as vice chair of the Menhaden Board? Seeing none, the motion stands approved. Congratulations, Russ. We look forward to working with you. Under other business, which I believe is the last item on the agenda, I'd like to ask Robert Boyles to come up and join me at the front as we take up this issue, which is consideration of a resolution regarding exemplary service. As the board knows, this is Mike Wayne's final meeting as FMP coordinator. While we are thrilled for him and his new job opportunity, we are less than thrilled about losing our guiding force. Over the past several years, Mike has done a tremendous job guiding the board through the Amendment 2 process and positioning us well as we prepare to embark on the Amendment 3 process. And so we want to take a moment to extend our appreciation via a gift and a resolution. First, the gift. Mike, on behalf of the board, we present you with this beautifully framed lithograph of Bravorsha tyrannus. I'd say Menhaden, but that word makes Jim Estes head spin, so I'll stick with the scientific name. Done by famed scientist and artist Sherman Denton. It's an original print from 1902. We present it with the hope and expectation that it will forever remind you of the fine work you've done on behalf of this fish and all who depend on it. And next I have a resolution. It's signed by all members of the board, and it reads as follows. Resolution in recognition and profound appreciation of distinguished service by Michael Wayne, duly adopted on May 4, 2016. Whereas Michael Wayne, in his capacity as Senior FMP Coordinator for the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission's Atlantic Menhaden Board, has thoughtfully, conscientiously, and professionally guided the board, resulting in the sound conservation and management of our most important fish. Now, therefore, we, the members of the Menhaden Board, representing 18 states and jurisdictions, extend our profound appreciation to Michael Wayne and wish him the very best in all of his future endeavors. This is a final action. It requires a roll call vote. Mike, would you please call the roll? Mike, please call the roll. Seriously.
I feel like the joke's on me. Just before I do that, I'm obviously shocked. It's been incredible working here. I love this commission. I love working with all the commissioners, the technical committee members that do so much for this board, the advisory panel and their input, and PDTs, PRTs, the list is endless, the public's involvement. It has truly made this experience something that I could have never imagined. And it has prepared me for whatever comes next in my career, and I'm ready to take that step, but I will never forget how amazing this opportunity was. And I wish all of you to do great things on Amendment 3. So thank you so much. And are we really doing a roll call right now?
It is a final action. It is required, yes.
So be it.
Do we have time to caucus on this?
No caucus. This is a roll call vote on the motion to approve and formally adopt the resolution in recognition and profound appreciation of distinguished service by Michael Wayne. Mike, please call the roll.
Okay, Maine?
Yes.
New Hampshire?
Smooth sailing, Mike.
Okay. The Commonwealth of Massachusetts?
Yes.
Rhode Island?
Yes.
Connecticut?
Absolutely.
New York?
Yes, and good luck, Mike. You are the best.
Thank you. New Jersey?
Yes.
Pennsylvania?
Yes.
Delaware?
Yes.
Maryland?
Yes, and thank you for all you have done.
Thank you. The Potomac River Fisheries Commission?
Congratulations, yes.
Thanks. Commonwealth of Virginia?
Yes.
North Carolina?
Yes.
South Carolina?
Enthusiastically, yes.
Georgia?
Yes.
Florida?
Yes.
NOAA Fisheries?
Yes, and welcome aboard.
Thank you. U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service?
Yes, and thank you, Mike.
And thank you.
The motion carries unanimously. Thank you, Mike, and thank you to everyone for your contributions. Without objection, I would move adjournment. I'm sorry, we have a couple hands raised in the back. Yes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know it's a long day, so I'll be very brief. I had the opportunity to read Pete Hemcheck's report on the fisheries and 2004 to 2013 dates, age 0 to 1, the takes were very low. The small component of the population was 5.3% for reduction and 1.1% for bait, with natural mortality being quite high. This leaves a lot of fish in the water, and I would like to recommend to the technical committee to review the information.
Thank you. I'm sure the TC will take that under advisement. Is there any other matters to be brought before the board under other business? Seeing none, is there any objection to adjourning? Seeing none, we're adjourned. Thank you very much.
The policy board will start in 10 minutes.